All right, it's time for our closing keynotes and final remarks. And I'm delighted to welcome everyone to this closing plenary, and I hope you're all ready for this. Okay, so I'm going to now introduce YS Chi for his closing remarks. YS Chi is an international businessman and a global thought leader in the publishing, education, and information solutions industries. As chairman of Elsevier, he works directly with key stakeholders in government, academia, and in industries to support over 30 million scientists, students, and health information professionals. In his role as Director of Corporate Affairs for RELX, Elsevier's parent company, he is responsible for government affairs, corporate communications, and corporate responsibility across all four of the group's market segments. So I'm going to be handing over to YS Chi now.
Thank you so much, Shola, for your kind introduction. And a very, very big thank you to Marcia, our standing CR team. RELX initiatives. I love how it brings us together to reflect on how we can create a more peaceful, prosperous, and productive planet, both now and into the future. In fact, I recently stumbled upon an ancient Native American quote that I believe resonates well with today's event and our joint mission towards sustainable development. The quote reads, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children." In other words, we must do our best to ensure that our future generations inherit a world that is no worse off than the one we ourselves were born into. Now, this idea may sound really daunting, especially as the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated global issues everywhere, like poverty, hunger, education, debt, inequalities, you can name. But if anything else, these exposed fragilities provide even more reasons for us to unite our minds and missions and look to the UN SDGs as our roadmap to a better future. If each of us and our businesses can work towards the 17 goals together, we can truly create a world that we'd be proud to pass on to our children, one that is socially fair, environmentally secure, inclusive, and therefore diverse, and economically prosperous. Fortunately, many of the companies involved today, whether they know it or not, are already playing their part in building this brighter future. For example, by hiring and paying employees fairly and in a gender-neutral way and looking after their well-being and health, we are advancing goals 3, 5, and 8. Or by adopting impactful business models that reduce our company's carbon footprints, we are advancing goal 13. And at RELX, we strive to apply our unique contributions to SDG agenda across each of our 4 business sectors. Elsevier is advancing goal 3 by increasing scientific knowledge and reducing health disparities. Our LexisNexis Risk Solutions teams are supporting goal number 10 by addressing online fraud and reducing identity theft to keep communities safe. At LexisNexis Legal, we are advancing goal number 16 by promoting the rule of law that ensures justice is served to all around the world. And finally, Reed Exhibitions shows are promoting goal number 11 by fostering sustainable cities and communities through an increased focus on zero carbon. A holistic commitment to the SDGs can help businesses highlight new opportunities, attract new young talents, drive new partnerships, and build positive reputations. To illustrate, LexisNexis is partnering with like-minded foundations to train judges and connect a better understanding and representation of the gender spectrum by featuring gender non-conforming individuals on panels. We have accomplished quite a lot since 2015, but the pandemic has definitely set us back a bit with some extra ground to cover with just less than a decade to go. Before COVID-19, the world was already off track to end poverty by 2030, and in 2020 alone, more than 71 million people were pushed into extreme poverty. This leads to the first increase in global poverty in decades. Before COVID-19, less than half of the global population was covered by essential health services. And yet, pandemic only served to interrupt childhood immunization programs in around 70 additional countries. And before COVID-19, over 200 million children were still projected to be out of school in 2030, while school closures kept 90% of all students out of school, reversing years of progress on education. So each and every one of us must recognize just how vulnerable we can become. And we all have a duty to protect the most marginalized individuals who are just as worthy as any one of us, as any head of government or as head of any CEO of a company. As growing business leaders, we must prioritize our plans to align with the SDGs in any possible way, because supporting sustainable development is one of the smartest strategic investments we can make for our future. Whether this means reevaluating your vendors, starting a company-wide green initiative, creating business charity synergies, or forming new ERGs, we can all find a part to play. For instance, Unilever and Schneider Electric are combating inequality while promoting equal conditions and human rights by pledging to ensure that everyone who directly provides goods and services to their companies, regardless of which step in the supply chain, will earn at least a living wage or income by 2030. And as we heard from Mark Waddington of Hope and Homes for Children, they're forming partnerships with civil society and private sector to strengthen their brand and increase staff productivity while promoting social cohesion across the market. And we at RELX are incredibly proud to partner with Hope and Homes for Children to create effective change across communities. As a matter of fact, a dear friend of mine, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, is a prime example of an inspiring change maker who has long committed to creating a better world. Under his leadership, he used his position to give a voice to the world's poorest and the most vulnerable people. And his major initiatives have included the 2007 Climate Change Summit, the creation of UN Women, and leading efforts for the Paris Climate Agreement. It is now my honor to introduce former Secretary General Ban to tell us a little more about how we must continue to accelerate our solutions and strategies for more sustained and responsible businesses.
7th Annual RELX SDG Inspiration Day, and I'm very happy to be a part of it in my capacity as the co-chair of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. Dear Marcia, thank you for the invitation. It is a joy to be here and to leverage and showcase the power of partnerships. The PKMC is proud to be one of your official partners for several years now, and to have you serve on its board. You and RELX Group have been a steadfast supporter of the PKMC Global Citizen Scholarship Programs and of the recent Climate Justice webinar series. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this year's Inspiration Day, Mobilizing Business for a Better World, is bringing together innovators, thought leaders, and sustainability professionals to catalyze business action for the SDGs. The discussions taking place today should serve to keep up the momentum, deepen the commitment, and reach out more effectively to businesses to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs. As a former UN Secretary General, I was honored to work on numerous pressing issues, from combating poverty and taking action for gender equality to spearheading the international efforts for sustainable development. In this context, the 17 SDGs, adopted by 193 countries in New York in 2015, offer us a way to confront the most critical issues of our time. Last year, we entered the Decade of Action, which calls for accelerating sustainable solutions to all the world's biggest challenges. At the same time, COVID-19 hit the global community unexpectedly hard. It magnified existing challenges such as climate change, gender inequality, education disparities, humanitarian crises, and widening poverty gaps. A funding gap of $2.5 trillion per year for the SDGs is a massive challenge to their implementation. The pandemic has had serious impacts on the advancement we had already made. Yet climate change and the SDGs should remain high on the agenda of leaders. Now, with only 9 years left to achieve the SDGs, to tackle these additional challenges, it is time that we harness all the energy and support needed to accelerate the implementation of all SDGs. For this, we need everyone's engagement. If we want this global roadmap to succeed by 2030, the contribution of businesses is essential. I'm proud to have expanded and mainstreamed the UN Global Compact, which ensures that business is done both sustainably and responsibly. The UN Global Compact does this by bringing together over 10,000 signatories from 170 countries in a public-private partnership to help achieve the SDGs. The PKMC recently joined the UN Global Compact Austria to contribute to its collective goals of international cooperation, peace and development. Ladies and gentlemen, events like the RELX Inspiration Day provide the platform to bring diverse stakeholders together to have these important conversations. Today, our CEO, Monica Freller, will be moderating the session, mobilizing future business leaders on the SDGs. She will be joined by one of our very own global citizen scholars and entrepreneur, Akosua Pepra from Ghana. Together, they will highlight how youth is taking action to embed the SDGs into businesses in communities all around the world, showcasing social entrepreneurship and activism. We are also very happy that the 2021 cohort of 8 global citizen scholars from Africa are able to participate in the RELX Inspiration Day as part of their scholarship program this year. I look forward to the outcomes of today, and I'm thankful to all representatives who joined here today. Your perspectives and actions are vital, and the future is in your hands. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Secretary General Ban, for such wise and thoughtful remarks. For those in the audience who may not know, SG Ban has just published his memoir of his 10 years at the UN. It's called Resolve, Uniting Nations in a Divided World. It was just published on June 15th. I recommend that you read his memoir because it is really an incredible history of all the things that have happened during those 10 years and more issues that we have to deal with going forward. And now I would like to introduce our next keynote speaker, Mr. Michael Mick Sheldrick, co-founder and Chief Policy and Government Relations Officer at Global Citizen. I think most of you know who Mick is, but he oversees international advocacy campaigns in support of all kinds of issues like universal sanitation, climate mitigation, adaptation efforts, access to education, food security, gender equality, and disease elimination and prevention. His writings, his work, and his efforts have been instrumental in mobilizing both political and public support for the SDGs. So I'm very excited to hear what he has to share with us. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mick.
Well, thank you, Chairman Chi, and thank you to the RELX group in having me today. It's a great honor to also follow an amazing man, Ban Ki-moon, who's, you know, from my perspective, has done so much for the world in sustainable development. Before I get started, I want to just show a very brief video introducing our work at Global Citizen, who we are, and what we've been up to the last few years.
So this is what we walk away, oh, may the last one burn to flame. Freedom, freedom, I can't lose. Freedom, cut me loose. Freedom, freedom, where are you? I need freedom too. I break chains around myself, and my freedom running hell. Hey, I'ma keep it running 'cause the winner gon' win 'em, say yeah. I'm away through the waters till the tide don't move. I'm a ride through your borders, coming bulletproof. Don't forget me, I've been running blind and true. I'm away through your shadow, love, tell the deep I'm blue. Telling these tears don't fall away, oh, may the last one burn into flame.
Well, you know, what I wanted to give you a brief overview today is not just our work at Global Citizen, but also the role of the private sector in achieving a world without extreme poverty. At Global Citizen, you know, our core objective is really the Sustainable Development Goals to end extreme poverty, reduce inequality, and mitigate climate change by 2030. And our model, which we've popularized over the last few years, uses a unique mix of content, events, grassroots organizing, and our action platform to educate and inform global citizens around the world and provide them with a meaningful platform to take action and drive meaningful impact towards the achievement of the SDGs. And our platform both educates about the systemic issues of extreme poverty and inspires them to take action in exchange for rewards, whether that's amazing experiences with some of our partners or tickets to our own events, such as the Global Citizen Festival. And through taking action, you know, ultimately we are supporting this movement around the SDGs because ultimately, you know, it's not going to be charity that changes the world. It's going to be, you know, working in partnership with governments, philanthropists, corporations, and citizens as the major agent of change to create the meaningful policy changes and funding decisions that's going to address the roots of extreme poverty. And so as we look beyond the pandemic, Global Citizen this year we have a lot that we want to achieve, not just this year, but beyond. We're seeing over the last 18 months the biggest crisis of our generation. And while recovery is finally in sight, at least for those of us that can access a vaccine, in looking at the challenges facing our world post-COVID and the challenges that will arise as a result of COVID, we believe that over the coming 12 months, we need to focus on the essential needs and really prioritize if we're going to recover better together. We cannot imagine a world free from COVID really without addressing the fundamental and structural health, social, and economic challenges which were exacerbated by the pandemic. And so to this end, our campaign in this year has been grounded in the recovery plan for our world, which was a blueprint involving 5 key priority areas that we launched in February this year with over 23 governments, with Hugh Jackman, with Billie Eilish. And the 5 priorities are firstly to end the pandemic for everyone, for ensuring everyone has access to a vaccine. Secondly, making sure we stop the hunger crisis. And this is really the shadow pandemic. It's set that the numbers of those marching towards starvation are set to double by the end of this year. Resuming education for all and not just those that can afford remote learning. Rebooting action on climate change. And finally, promoting equity and justice for all. And so we launched this in February, and our first key milestone was actually last month with our Vax Live, the concert to reunite the world, which was broadcast around the world, and which we had everyone from President Biden, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and even the Pope participate, and which really focused on both vaccine equity, but also ensuring uptake of the vaccine and addressing vaccine hesitancy. And the campaign resulted in the mobilization of more than 26 million vaccine doses to be shared around the world. And I share this example because a significant amount of those doses was funded through the private sector. And one of the insights I wanted to share for our work on the pandemic in the last 18 months is really that we saw firsthand the ability and willingness of the private sector to stand up and respond. We believe that the private sector can and should do more in ensuring we build a world where all of us, and not just some of us, have the ability to live a healthy, productive life with dignity, free from extreme poverty. And the role of corporate philanthropy in generating that outcome often gets dismissed because, in terms of corporate philanthropy, it's not necessarily at the same scale as the billions that might get provided in public funding. So sometimes we get corporations ask us, do their CSR or philanthropic dollars actually play a key role? We believe it does, as we saw last year. One of the key lessons we learned is that businesses and philanthropists are able to mobilize and put funds immediately towards impact in the hands of beneficiary organizations, those on the front lines, to meet their urgent needs much faster than governments, especially at the initial stages of a crisis. So last year, when we did our many campaigns, we saw through our efforts over $275 million pledged from the private and philanthropic sectors to COVID-19 responses. And what we saw was that more than 75% of that funding was dispersed and got into the organizations who needed it within 3 months of the commitment being made, which in a crisis is critical, and governments can take much longer. And for those organizations on the front line, often it's even hard for them to apply for that level of funding. So our view is it definitely fills a critical void and plays a role. But the second key insight and learning is that whilst we need the private sector to step up and support those on the front lines of the response and the recovery and resilience building, definitely remains a priority. Ultimately, the private sector has a key role to play in achieving the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. If you look at where 80% of global corporate and industrial emissions come from, 80% lies ultimately with 160 companies alone. And so for our sake, you know, what we as a planet need is we actually need not just governments, but companies also stepping up and putting in place science-based targets in line with the Paris Agreement in order to cool the planet and avoid the many catastrophic extreme weather events that we've now seen, you know, plaguing our lives, plaguing livelihoods, whether in California or the west coast of Africa, and ultimately disrupting, you know, hundreds of thousands of livelihoods around the world. And what I would say to this is, you know, and this is going to be important over the next 6 months, is, you know, there's a lot of talk around making a commitment to net zero emissions. Our view is that this is a first but insufficient step. Ultimately, we have to commit to actual reductions. And if we're living up to the Paris Agreement, that ultimately means a reduction of at least 45% by 2030, with using offsets as a last resort, which themselves, if done well, can provide a lot of value, have a lot of co-benefits. But we think that companies can ultimately go further by instituting these policies in their supply chains, amongst their vendors, and even educating and engaging their customers to understand their carbon footprint and how they can take account for their own emission. And we're working with some really cool actions as part of our Global Citizen platform, which would allow citizens to calculate their footprint and then lead to the measures that they can take. And we hope that this is a platform that might be of benefit to many companies, particularly those, you know, as they look at their scope 3, their customer or their fan base, how they might be able to instill a sense of individual accountability. And this is important because, as Secretary Kerry, President Biden's special envoy on climate change, said earlier this year at the launch of our recovery plan, you know, this will be the decade when we determine whether or not we avoid catastrophic climate change, and business have a key role as part of that. And so I really applaud those, you know, amongst you like RELX that have already come out. And frankly, you know, BHP, when the previous CEO said, you know, we're not going to set a target because we don't know how to meet it, and the incoming CEO said, look, yes, we don't necessarily know how to meet it, but if we don't set that target, we will never be motivated to achieve it. And it was compared to the moonshot in the 60s of JFK. They didn't know how they were going to put a man on the moon, but they knew if they never set themselves a deadline, they would probably never do it. And it's that sort of ambition that we need right now. And really, from our perspective at Global Citizen, we're there to help along the way. Often there is a translation problem between, you know, the Global Compact does a lot of great work, and there's lots of other organizations up there, but sometimes people, you know, they just want to know how they can implement these policies. And so what we've spent a lot of time making at Global Citizen is very clear guidelines on how people can contribute. And we're about to launch next month our next big milestone campaign for the year, Global Citizen Live, which will drive commitments on the fight against COVID, food security, climate change, education, and equity, and will culminate in a 12-hour globally broadcast event on September 25th, just on during the week of the UN General Assembly, to drive momentum ahead of the G20 summit in Rome later this year and ahead of the COP26 discussions in Glasgow at the end of the year. And we would invite anyone that wants to get involved, make a commitment. You can come and speak to our team. We've got clear guidelines. We would be happy to share with you on how you can step up and make a contribution and really leverage that and set an example for our political leaders. I'm really of the firm belief that we can't wait around for that leadership. And on that point, and in closing, I would just like to say that, you know, I firmly believe that each generation has the opportunity to leave its mark on the world. Over a century ago, when the world emerged from the First World War, and what was at the time an unprecedented influenza pandemic, it was meant to be, it was said at the time that, this would be the start of decades of prosperity. And of course, we all know that instead the world turned inwards, economies spiraled, currencies lost their value, people starved, the world was torn asunder again, and millions died. And then at the end of that second Great War, the leaders who had been soldiers and on the front lines in the first committed to the birth of the United Nations. And I share that because I still remember at the start of the pandemic last year, and I was probably one of the first people, I think, certainly that I knew in my whole networks to have COVID. And I was here in New York, and we were producing at the same time our very first One World Together at Home special. I still remember having this sense, WhatsApp and friends, people all around the world, and having this palpable sense of solidarity that seemed to penetrate amongst all nations, all society at once, because of that shared experience. And it's what led us to call in our first virtual campaign of the pandemic, One World Together at Home. Well, more than a year on, we have to ask ourselves, will we let the old inequities roar back to existence, return to a world of nation states where the strong prosper and the small suffer? So far, I have to say, our response as a global community to the question of vaccine equity seems to suggest we're certainly at risk of going back to that. The alternative is we end a pandemic for everyone and kickstart a recovery for all, setting an example and a benchmark for the future. Because after all, the world's greatest opportunity lies in human life. And on that point, earlier this year, a close friend of mine released a book, actually a former board member at the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. And in that book, he called it the opportunity gap. And he said near the end, he said, individuals, businesses, and organizations that focus on the challenges are defined by their challenges, while those that focus on the opportunities are defined by their opportunities. And so let us be defined by our shared humanity and the opportunity that lies within that. And so with that, I want to thank you for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I hope to see you on either side of our platform or at one of our events or campaign milestones over the coming years and months. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mick. Thank you, Mick, for sharing such deep and grand and passionate, impactful insights. It is amazing that Global Citizen continues to move at an incredible speed, both for new efforts and increased impact of programs that you have helped fund. And as one of your slides said, more to do after impacting 1 billion people. Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to thank everyone once again for joining us for this year's SDG Inspiration Day. Back to you, Shola.
Thank you, Wyas. That was truly a very interesting remarks given by Mick. So thank you both for that. All right, everyone, we're nearly close to the end. Just sit tight. We have two more people to speak very briefly. And I want to take this time now to introduce Sanda Ojiambo. Sanda Ojiambo is Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact. Ms. Ojiambo brings 20 years of experience to lead the UN Global Compact. She served as head of Sustainable Business and Social Impact, Safaricom Kenya, since 2010. Ms. Ojiambo was also the senior manager of Safaricom and M-Pesa Foundations, Kenya from 2008 to 2010, during which she led the implementation of several public-private partnership initiatives between Safaricom and UN organizations. Throughout her career, she has cultivated and managed relationships with key business entities and civil society organizations, including her capacity development work in Somalia with UNDP and CARE International. Handing over to Sanda.
Gentlemen, it is both my pleasure and privilege to join you here at the RELX SDG Inspiration Day, mobilizing business for a better world and accelerating business action on the SDGs. The RELX Group involvement is so important and represents a vital link in the chain of universal, sustainable access to information as business works to achieve impact on the Sustainable Development Goals. The power of data to advance the SDGs is undeniable, and your support in broadening awareness and information sharing between science, law, business, and the non-profit sector will continue to play an even more essential role in the post-COVID world. With the coronavirus, we have dealt with a global pandemic that has devastated public health and people's livelihoods, disrupted supply chains, deepened social inequalities, and undone progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. At the same time, we face a climate emergency with irreversible impacts for people and all the natural systems that sustain us. In the face of these crises, the Global Compact SDG Ambition Accelerator is encouraging companies to set ambitious corporate targets to accelerate the incorporation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals into core business management and will increase positive business impact on the SDGs. The RELX Sustainable Development Goals Resource Center and its ongoing partnership with the United Nations Global Compact through its work on the Water Action Hub and Decent Work Innovation make it an essential platform to achieve SDG ambition on the 2030 goals. RELX Group has worked with the Global Compact on such seminal reports such as Business Leadership for 1.5 degrees Celsius, the UN Global Compact Accenture Strategy 2019 CEO study, work on the Water Action Hub, fast-tracking zero-carbon economic growth, as well as webinars for peace, justice, and strong institutions, and on decent work. Such ongoing and in-depth collaboration has strengthened commitment to adopt sustainable, responsible business policies under the UN Global Compact's 10 principles for human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption, and has driven fulfillment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The UN Global Compact is here to work with you, side by side, uniting business for a better world. Once again, we thank you for your continued commitment and dedication to these universal goals.
Many thanks, Sanda Ojiambo. Thank you very much. And now we introduce to you Baroness Helena Kennedy. Baroness Helena Kennedy QC is one of Britain's most distinguished lawyers. She spent her professional life giving voice to those who have least power within the system, championing civil liberties and promoting human rights. She has conducted many prominent cases of terrorism, official secrets, and homicide. In 1997, she was elevated to the House of Lords, where she's a Labour peer. She has published 2 books on how the justice system is failing women and has written and broadcasted on many issues over the years. Currently, she has taken on the role of director of the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute. She directs the institute's work upholding the rule of law and human rights globally. Handing over to Helena Kennedy.
My name is Helena Kennedy, Baroness Helena Kennedy. I'm a Queen's Counsel here in the United Kingdom, and it's my great honour to be joining you at this event where we're discussing with business leaders and creative people in the business world about the ways in which business can achieve the sustainable goals which the UN is placing before us, and really urging us to use in our ways of improving the world. And so I just wanted to pick out a few of them, which I can speak with a little bit of experience, and really say to our friends in the business world that this really is an area where you can make a huge difference. Because having ethical businesses that are committed to these goals will make an enormous difference, not only to, I think, your own profitability and your own success as businesses, winning the support and approval of consumers around the world, but also making the lives of workers so much different. And I actually think that all the work that's been done shows that this actually leads to more successful businesses and more profitable and, in fact, more ethically successful businesses. So the first thing is that, I mean, we still have this huge gap in our world between rich and poor. And in fact, it has been growing enormously. The opportunities then, of course, to exploit poor people in order to, as employees, is of course available to anybody. But what an ethical business, of course, is doing, and one that's committed to the sustainable development goals, is to make sure that people are not being abused in ways that we all know about. And so to challenge poverty, people have to have wages on which they can live a decent life. And I hope that you will take that to your hearts as being one of the most fundamental of all things. The business of, for me, is about conditions in the workplace. A number of years ago, there was this shocking business of Rana Plaza, the fire that took place and the collapsing then of a building in Bangladesh, where many of the workers, mainly women, were killed or grievously injured. And part of it was that the factory really just did not have conditions of work that were acceptable. The building itself was fragile, but also there was cooking, there was paraffin stuff there, so that people cooked inside the building during the working day, because to make food available to keep people working longer hours. And the business world came together, and in fact, out of that came the Ruggie principles about human rights and business. There was a real sense of urgency around the business world saying we have to make sure that there are standards in these factories which provide us with goods which we then in turn sell in our retail outlets around the Western world. So the business of conditions of work is vitally important, but also conditions of work for women whose needs are particular. And one of the things that as a human rights lawyer that comes to my attention is the ways in which women experience grievous sexual harassment and sexual abuse in workplaces where there are no consideration of their rights. And so again, in your supply chains, there is an obligation for really to look and make sure that some of these things are being addressed, and that there's an absolute sense in which you will not contract with suppliers who have conditions that are unacceptable. And so the business of reducing inequality, of creating workplaces where these sorts of behaviors are not a commonplace is vitally important. Of course, much of our work in the Institute of Human Rights of the International Bar Association is around standard setting. And of course, for us, part of the whole business is about justice and about making sure that there are good justice systems which are committed to the rule of law, and where standards are maintained, and where people are not thrown into prison without respect for any of those standards. And so as a lawyers organization, you would expect that I would be saying that it's important that as businesses setting up practices and having supply chains in parts of the world where there are fragile legal systems, is to be really engaging in discussions with those countries about if we're to come and set up business and workplaces here, or to use your factories as suppliers of commodities, we do expect that there should be ways in which our contractual relations and our workers are protected and their rights are protected. And so in all of your considerations, you are powerful advocates for changes on those sorts of issues. So look at the sustainable goals and go through them and see the ways in which they might impact on your practices as businesses, because the most creative people are and entrepreneurial people are in the world of business. And my experience always is that, that your power is so great that you can create enormous change. So I wish that you well in this event and in the discussions that take place, but underpinning it all has to be that we have to have a rules-based world if we're going to be successful in protecting the rights of everybody. And you as advocates should be joining with us in calling for that around the world.
If I may, I'm going to now move to Marcia. She is, as you remember, at the top of the event. We introduced Marcia as the founding director of RELX's corporate responsibility. And Marcia will be giving the final closing remarks. So over to Marcia.
Thank you, Shola. Thank you to everyone. We will make sure that we get Baroness Kennedy's remarks to you, and apologize for that technical challenge. We've actually been very lucky today in that everything has gone really smoothly. So I'm going to give you a real treat to end on. So I wonder if you can just indulge me for a minute. I wanted to summarize some of what I'm taking away from this 6th edition of the RELX SDG Inspiration Day. So I first want to thank Professor Eunice, who kicked things off after our wonderful presentations of the micro presentations by the We Empower winners, who are young women entrepreneurs doing some really important things in their businesses to advance the SDGs. It really set the tone. But Professor Eunice asked us a question: do we want to be a global village, or do we want to be a string of isolated islands? I think we know the answer to that question. I really was struck by how he was the change he wanted to see. He talked about how he fought loan sharks, and he flipped the paradigm of going to the wealthy in the banking world and serving men. He went to poor women in establishing the Grameen Bank, and these were women who were able, with having access to microcredit, to transform the economic and social well-being of their families and their communities. He also talked about innovation and gave the wonderful example of Grameen Solar, how if you pay money in Bangladesh to Grameen Solar that you would have paid for kerosene, a very climate unfriendly energy source, and you pay that for 3 years, then you can own your solar outright, and actually you're creating a sustainable market for transformational change in how people cook and heat their homes and do what they need to do. And he also highlighted how the pandemic has given us a pause button, and now it's up to us, particularly those of us in the business community as well, to consider whether we can use this to go in a new direction. And he highlighted the climate challenge, that we need to stop the house from burning. There's not a lot we can do if it still continues to burn. So we need to address global warming. And he also closed with something that he is going to be talking more about this summer in July, the 3 zeros, their new strategy, which is looking at net zero. So that's one of the zeros, no wealth concentration. And he gave this shocking statistic that 1% of the population holds nearly 99% of global wealth. And the 3rd zero is that there needs to be zero unemployment. And it's a theme that I heard Manoj saying later on in the day about really unleashing people's entrepreneurial capabilities, because all people can be entrepreneurs, and that's where technology can really come into play. We are deeply honored that former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon spoke to us as well. He is the architect of the Sustainable Development Goals, which we've been celebrating today. He highlighted that last year we entered the decade of action. 2030 is before us. And if we want this global roadmap to succeed, he said, we need everyone to play its part, including business. We need to build platforms. We need to bring diverse stakeholders together, which is what we've been trying to do at this SDG Inspiration Day. And he highlighted how the pandemic has had a serious impact on achievements that had already been made, particularly on poverty elimination. So we need to harness all of the energy that we can muster to accelerate not only getting back on track to where we were before the pandemic, but going further, faster. We had some tremendous panels today, and I want to thank Monica, Shabnam, Akusa, and Kenneth about mobilizing future business leaders, the voice of youth. We need to be intentional about how we bring younger voices to the table. It's not going to happen by accident. We need to let them in. We also had an amazing panel with our colleagues talking about furthering the rule of law. And what we heard in the overarching theme was that we need trust in legal systems. That has to be the floor upon which we can achieve the SDGs. And I think that there was a very good example in how LexisNexis Legal and Professional defines this as equality under the law, transparency under the law, having an independent judiciary, and making sure that people have accessible access to legal remedy. We have had Speaker's Corner today. We had so many wonderful people contribute videos, and you will be able to hear those on the RELX SDG Resource Center. We're going to get those uploaded. Just some of the people that we heard from were Catherine Dovey at Open for Business. We heard Zamzam Osman and Jordan Bickerton of Brunswick Group, our very own Chief Legal Officer, Hank Udow, Amanda Ellis of ASU, Wrigley Global Futures, and also one of the founders of the We Empower Challenge. We had colleagues from the UN Global Compact talking to us about their work, and so many others. We had customer awards, and we're very grateful to our CFO, Nick Luff, and also to our Chief Strategy Officer, Helena Savo, for presenting these awards. Elsevier nominated the University of Sao Paulo, RX nominated A&E Networks, LexisNexis Legal nominated the International Commission of Jurists, and LexisNexis Risk Solutions nominated Orsted, all for their work on the SDGs. So we're very grateful to our customers, and we want to continue to work with them to advance this agenda. On the leaders panel, we heard from Kumsal at Elsevier, Hugh Jones at RX, and Philippe from Schneider Electric, talking about how innovation comes from our people. We need to allocate the resources, lend support, and stay out of the way so that we can bring that innovation to the fore. And what I really loved in hearing from those leaders, and I think James Harding at Tortoise Media, our media partner for today, brought out so well, is that leaders lead from the front. And then we had a great panel on the discussion of health diplomacy, the importance of purpose-driven innovation, some really great examples of the collaboration that needs to happen between business and the rest of society, not least in vaccine development. If things have a price, we heard from Dimitri de Vries of DSM, like methane, like carbon, then we get the innovation. On the Reduced Inequalities panel, Irina Bokova highlighted how we need to continue to bridge the digital divide, avoid bias in technology like AI. But Wes and Manoj were very encouraging and told us to use AI for good, that disruptive technology can be harnessed, not least for entrepreneurship, financial inclusion. And we also heard from Anna at UN Women and the Women's Empowerment Principles about how using a gender lens can be very powerful in lots of different areas, including in investing. YS told us something which I think is really something I'm going to take away and remember, that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And we heard how the SDGs are at the core of what we do at RELX. Mick at Global Citizen has encouraged us to raise our ambition. What they do at scale is so impressive. And I think I encourage everyone to find out more about Global Citizen's 5-point recovery plan, which he highlighted, which is about ending the pandemic for everyone through access to vaccines, stopping hunger, ending the shadow pandemic, which is poverty, and the need to overcome some of what the pandemic has set us back in terms of, for example, hunger. Having education for all, and then rebooting action on climate change and ensuring equality while we pursue this agenda. Sanda highlighted the essential role of the United Nations Global Compact in helping companies on their journey to achieve the SDGs. I can't tell you how helpful it has been to us at RELX to be a signatory, and I encourage anyone who is not any of the business colleagues listening today who are not part of the UN Global Compact to sign up and become a signatory, because it can be incredibly helpful. I also want to thank our amazing host today, Dr. Shola Moss Shogbamimu. She's our hero. She's a lawyer, activist, commentator. She's also a singer, which she did a little bit of today. And I want to thank all of our amazing speakers and contributors. And I'd like to thank our close partners who helped to make today possible. The Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. Keep going on the great work that you do. The UN Global Compact UK. I have the privilege of serving as the chair here. And I want to thank Steve Kenzie for his continued support as our executive director. The UN Global Compact India, and thank Shabnam Siddiqui for her support. Schneider Electric, Andy Dewis, Philippe, Gary Cafe, so many other colleagues from Schneider for being a business peer in helping us bring together today. Global Citizen and Mick Sheldrick for all the inspiration. The Responsible Media Forum for leading on being a good media company. The United Nations Association of New York, we are so proud to partner with them. The World Humanitarian Forum, which is the largest initiative around humanitarianism for the 21st century, and also, again, our media partner, Tortoise Media. I want to thank the best team who have planned and delivered today. This is the result of months of work. Miriam Hill, Helen Shepard, Alexis Stedman, Kevin Agnew, Zoe Collins, Jake King, and Nicole Walsh. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. We know you're very busy and you have many ways to spend your time. So thank you. I want to encourage you all to keep in touch with us through the RELX SDG Resource Center. Inspiration Day is an initiative of this free resource for the world on the SDGs. You can sign up for our newsletter. We'll share the latest content every month with you.